right, here we are again. Monday, just what you were looking forward to. All right, so here's what we're going to do. First, before we get started, I've got some cool videos for you to watch. And the first two basically are sort of an overview of what we've been doing. The third one is more of a big picture look at interest rates and how they're determined in the marketplace, which, in the long run, if you're going to use this knowledge of your knowledge of interest rates to help you make decisions about what to borrow, when to borrow, when to buy, when to sell, when to invest, and all this and that, it certainly would help a lot if you not only understand how interest rates work, but what exactly determines them in the marketplace. In other words, if you read in the news that the Federal Reserve is thinking about raising rates or falling rates or something, lowering rates, you have to understand how that's going to impact on your own financial situation, and in particular, your investments. So this video that we'll be seeing will just give you a brief introduction as to how interest rates are determined in the economy. So it's more of a, like I said, a big picture look at interest rates, more of an economics discussion than a math discussion. But first, we're going to look at a couple of videos that will help us understand what we've been doing. And so we'll begin by looking at a video by Investopedia, which, by the way, if you've never stumbled onto this on the internet, Investopedia is essentially Wikipedia, but focused exclusively on finance, economics, business, you name it, they have it. So let's take a quick peek at it for a second. So you can see all the cool things that they have over there, the kinds of things you might want to learn more about, especially when you reach a point where you have enough money to invest and you want to understand what's going on in the markets. Now, they have all these wonderful articles here about what's going on right now in the real world. For example, how appropriate is this one? How to get COVID-19 student loan relief. Who doesn't want to know more about that? Or inflation's impact on stock returns. Well, once you start buying stocks, you'll want to understand how that works too. So there's all kinds of interesting articles. There's also these little mini courses that are available that you can watch on your computer and learn more about finance and investing. But what's even more important is that, let's say you need to understand more about, let's say, interest rates. So you type in the search engine interest rates, and you'll see that a whole slew of articles will show up, all of which could potentially be very interesting to you, all of which are certainly very informative. And all of these could potentially be very helpful when you are deciding whether or not to invest your money or where to invest it. These types of decisions really need to be based on knowledge of what's happening in the real world. And you can find a lot of that information right here. So don't forget about that name, Investopedia. Okay, it should be easy. Remember, it's just Wikipedia for investors. That's essentially what it is. I'm sure that's where the name came from. So the reason why I brought all this up is because this first video was actually produced by Investopedia. And when you see how good it is, you'll realize how important a site this is for finding out about finance and business and investing. All right, so let's start by sending you this link so we can watch this first one. And this is a review of what we've been learning about compound interest. Okay, but it's very nicely done, so I think it's well worth our while to watch it. All right, so here we go. Let me send this to you right now, and let's check it out.
Compound interest is the interest an investor earns on his
All right, are we done? Good. All right, so you can see, yes, this is exactly what we've been doing. I'm hoping that that gave you a little more perspective on how we calculate compound interest and how it is different than simple interest. So now the next one that we're going to see is actually not that different from this one, but it's kind of nice to see it explained in a slightly different way. So let's see, let me get this over to you. All right, let's check it out. All right, are we done? All right, so there's one more. Like I said, this one is a little different. They're not actually calculating interest rates. What they're talking about is where they come from and why they fluctuate in the real world. Okay, so this is kind of important. Like I said, it's big picture stuff, which is really more for your own knowledge than for this course. Here, we're just focusing on the calculations. But like I said, when the time comes that you have money to invest, it's awfully important that you understand how interest rates are determined, and so that, and because that in turn will determine how successful your investments are. So it's important to understand what's happening in the real world at all times, especially when it comes to your money. All right, there's no getting around that. You have to pay attention, otherwise you're bound to do something with your money that you shouldn't have, and you'll end up regretting it. So yes, the more information you have, the better job you'll be able to do investing your money. Anyway, so let's take a look at this. And some of this material, you may have heard about this in your travels. It's possible that you've heard about some of this on TV, or you may have run across this on the internet. But if not, that's okay. If you've never heard of any of this before, that's fine. This is meant to be a very brief introduction to a very important concept. So let's take a look at it. All right, here we go. Okay, are we all done? Well, that was different, wasn't it? Yes. So the Federal Reserve System is the central bank of the United States, and it has a lot of different functions, among them being the regulation or oversight of the entire banking system. But most importantly, they're the ones who ultimately determine the level of interest rates in the economy. And so what they're trying to accomplish is to try to find a good balance between inflation and unemployment. Now, we don't want to have either inflation or unemployment in the economy, but it's very difficult to get rid of both of them at the same time. So they do what they can to balance them off. And, let's face it, they've done a pretty good job of it because we don't see enormous interest rates. We don't see high inflation rates. We don't see high unemployment rates, although the unemployment rate is higher than it should be because of COVID. But prior to the COVID, the unemployment rate was at a very low level. And so was the inflation rate. And so were interest rates. Now, interest rates are still low. And so is inflation. Unemployment's a little higher, but it is improving as the COVID gradually disappears. So the economy is in pretty good shape, but the Fed has to be vigilant to make sure that as it rebounds from this crisis that we're in, that inflation doesn't start to rise again. So, that's why people are so focused on the financial news. They watch the Fed every day to see what they have to say for themselves, because if interest rates do start to go up again, it has a major impact on everybody in the economy who borrows money. And it also affects the returns to our investments. So this is a very interesting area which you could pursue further if you decided to, I don't know, take a course in economics. That's a possibility. You may have some free electives in your schedule, and you may say, what the heck? Why don't I learn more about this field of economics? That's where you'd have a lot more discussions about how interest rates are determined in the economy and what is the role of this Federal Reserve System. All right, but from our perspective, our job is to understand how to calculate interest rates, the future value that results from investing. This type of thing is what we're focused on here. We're taking interest rates as given. We're not really asking where they come from. But in economics, we do try to explain where interest rates come from. All right, well, enough of all that. Why don't we get back to what we're doing? So what I'm going to do here is this. Within this chapter, we've pretty much covered our discussion about the future value of a sum of money. Let's take a quick peek again at what we were doing. This formula, which you've seen so many times now, it's almost like you practically memorized it. This tells us how to calculate the future value of a sum of money. And we know that, for example, P is the principal or the sum that you've invested or borrowed for that matter. R is the annual rate of interest. N is the compounding frequency. T is the time in years. And finally, A is the future value. We're going to now consider a more complicated situation. What if the payment that you saved or borrowed is repeated more than once? What happens then? So let's say, for example, I decide to save not, let's say, $1,000 in the bank, but let's say I put $1,000 in the bank every year for 5 years, and I want to know how much I'll have in the future. That's a very much more complicated situation than what happens when we invest the money once. Or what if I need to borrow money more than once? How much will it cost me? These are the types of questions that we want to address next by introducing a very important concept in financial math. And that concept is known as the annuity. Now, before I go any further, I just want to mention that I'm changing the sequencing of this chapter a little bit. There's one more topic in here that we'll save for next time, and it's called, okay, where is it? The effective rate of interest. I've decided to save this for last and jump ahead to the annuities. I don't know, it just seems like the formulas that we're using when we talk about annuities are so closely related to what we did here that we may as well do this next. And then when we're done with our discussion about annuities, we'll jump back here and look at this discussion about effective rates of interest. Okay, so I just wanted to mention that if you were reading through the slides, you might have noticed that in the slides, the effective rate of interest comes next, but I think it makes more sense to jump ahead right now and look at annuities. Then we can come back and revisit this concept. Okay, so here we go. So let's jump ahead and look at annuities. Now, if you look at that word very carefully, you'll notice that annuities and the word annual both come from the same Latin word annum, which simply means yearly. And that gives us a hint as to what annuities are all about. An annuity is a repeated series of payments where the payments occur once a year And most importantly, they're equal to each other. All right. If we have something different, like, for example, the payments are not the same, then we do not have an annuity, and we have to treat it differently than what we're about to see here. So the formulas I'm about to show you are only valid when the payments are the same, and they're either annually or at least equally spaced apart. In other words, we can extend our formulas here to the case where we have, let's say, monthly payments or quarterly payments. As long as they're all the same, we can continue to use the formulas that were developed for annuities. Okay, now, here's a quick example of when this might come in handy. It turns out that in many states, not that any of us would know this from experience, of course, but in many states, the largest lottery prizes are sometimes not distributed as a single payment, but instead they're paid out as an annuity. For example, you may have a situation where somebody wins $1 million prize in the lottery and they expect to get a check for $1 million, but instead what they're going to get is $100,000 a year for 10 years. Now, the state, by the way, they can't just randomly decide to do this. The state has to tell you that they're going to do this. In other words, there has to be information available somewhere that explains to you how the lottery prizes are distributed. And so there's probably a website for each state that explains all of this in great detail. And often what happens is when the prize reaches a certain threshold, then instead of paying it out all at once, the state will reserve the right to give it to you as an annuity, and they have to tell you how it's going to be distributed. Now, there's two reasons for doing this. Number one, it saves the state money. Remember too, the lotteries themselves, the whole purpose of the lotteries is not because they're so much fun, although they certainly are. The lotteries are designed to raise money for the states who are always out of money. The states, no matter what they do, they never can seem to get their hands on enough money. And so quite a long time ago, actually, states started offering lotteries as a way of raising funds because they were just constantly running out of money. I think, if I remember correctly, Massachusetts may have been one of the earlier ones. Let's just take a quick peek at this. How long have states had lotteries? Oh my God. Well, that's okay, Puerto Rico, but New Hampshire, 64. Now, by the way, the lottery doesn't always involve putting numbers, buying numbers and stuff. They have these little things you can scratch, as they mentioned here, that you have either an instant prize or you get nothing. They have those too. They're like $1 or $2, and they're very popular. But here we're referring to the really big prizes where you pick a certain number of digits, and if you're lucky and you get all the digits, then you'll win a big fat prize. So it says here, as of November 2019, the lotteries have been established in 45 states and the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands. Because each state individually has to decide if they want this or not. This is not something run by the federal government. The individual states have to make up their own minds if they want to have this. There's a lot of resistance in the early years because it wasn't clear that it was ethical for a state to encourage gambling, which is essentially what they're doing. But after a while, it became clear that this is an important source of revenues, and like it says here, $17.6 billion in profits in 2009, with 11 states collecting more revenue from their state lottery than their state corporate income tax. Well, that shows you how important this has become. And of course, as I mentioned before, some of the states like Alabama and Utah do not have them because I guess they believe that this isn't really, let's just say it conflicts with their religious beliefs. Now, ironically enough, Nevada says here it doesn't have one because they're worried that it would provide too much competition to the casinos, which is really most of, Nevada's, let's face it, Nevada, their revenues are all coming from Las Vegas. So they have to be careful about that. Let's see, what else do we know? Oh, you know what we could find out? How big are the prizes? What is the largest state lottery prize in the US? The biggest, oh my God, the biggest lottery prize ever awarded in the United States was a $1.586 billion Powerball jackpot. Oh, man. So you can see it can really pile up there. Oh, that surprised me. I wasn't sure it was going to be that high, but anyway. But the bottom line is, when the prize gets to a certain point, though, then they typically split it up. Maybe let's do one more thing, if we can find this on the internet. Now, sometimes they offer you both choices. Yeah, I guess the thinking here is that you might choose the annuity instead of the lump sum for tax reasons if they give you that option. So, but anyway, but sometimes you don't, they just, the state just says, listen, we're not giving you the money as a lump sum. We're going to give it to you as an annuity. But it appears that some of these states you get a choice. Now, so here in this example here, suppose we have a situation where the prize is $1 million, but the state decides to hand it out as an annuity of $100,000 a year for 10 years. Now, the big question here is, which one? Suppose that your intention here is not to spend all the money, but to invest it. In which case, now forgetting about taxes, in which case would you end up with more interest if you had $1 million right away or $100,000 a year for 10 years? So I use that as a poll in the other class. Let me just run that by you. Oh, I see. I thought I could use the same poll. I guess not. All right. Okay. Yeah, last time it gave me a lot of trouble too. I don't know why. Yeah, it's just it's not having a good day. Every time I hit edit, it just brings me, what's going on here? Normally when I hit the edit button, it gives me the option to actually edit a poll. And oh, here we go. It only took like 13 times. So which will give you an investor the most interest? Okay, number one, receiving $1 million today, or receiving 100,000 per year for 10 years. All right, let's try that.
Aren't they both the same?
No, that it's actually not going to be the same.
But it both adds up to $1 million.
That's true, but we're going to see why that's not the case. I mean, you might think so. It makes
Or is it
sense.
saying like you get interest on either one of these or?
Yes. In other words, what I'm
Okay, so
assuming
now I
is,
understand. Sorry, I thought you meant like which one adds up to more. I didn't
oh,
realize
no, no,
you
no.
were saying
Which
like
one?
before interest.
Right. In other words, in which
Okay, now I
case,
get it. Okay, thank you.
okay. All right. So is everyone done voting? All right. So it turns out that having all the money today will in fact give you more interest. Now, of course, I'm assuming that you do invest the entire amount in both cases. So having it all today is more advantageous is in terms of investing it. And as we saw briefly when we were flipping around through the internet, it also, on the other hand, can give you you might end up paying more taxes though. So that's a consideration in the real world. But in terms of just interest payments, you'd be better off having the $1 million now than having $100,000 a year for 10 years. So what we're going to be able to do when this chapter is over is actually prove that by showing how much the money would be worth under those two different circumstances. All right. So anyway, in fact, we can do it very quickly. When we're done learning our new formulas, we can demonstrate what a difference it makes to have the money right away versus spreading it out over 10 years. And how are we going to do that? We're going to be introduced to a new formula that lets us calculate the future value of an annuity. And it's somewhat related. In fact, it's very closely related to what we've been doing. Up to this point, we've been calculating the future value of a sum of money, but we've never tried to do this with repeated cash flows. So this will be our first time. And so, as you can probably imagine, the formula is a little bit more complicated. Maybe not, it's not much more complicated, but it is more complicated. Now, before we do that, though, I do want to mention here that that formula, even though it's meant for annuities, an annuity, if you want to be really technical about it, only refers to cases where the cash flows occur once a year. But in practice, we often find situations where we have repeated payments that occur more than once a year, like a car loan. If you've ever borrowed money to buy a car, well, maybe one of these days you will, you'll discover that the payments are made every month and they're all exactly the same amount. So you might, for example, find yourself paying let's say $300 a month for 60 months. That would be a typical car loan. Now, there may be a deposit or down payment in the beginning of the loan, but the actual payments will be exactly the same amount every month. That's done intentionally. It's very unusual to find a case where that's not what's happening. In other words, traditionally, long-term loans are organized this way. So in this case, even though the payments do not occur once a year, we can think of this as what we will call a monthly annuity, which is, it's monthly annuity, meaning 12 times a year. And because the payments are exactly the same and they're equally spaced apart, we can still use our annuity formula, even though these payments are not technically an annuity. Okay, so just be aware of that. The frequency is not a problem as long as the size of the payments is always the same. So we can feel free to use this formula to analyze car loans, even though the payments take place every month instead of every year. Now, also in practice, you may have heard this word annuity in terms of insurance. Insurance companies sell these products. An annuity with insurance companies, if you say to the insurance company, I want to buy an annuity, what you're really doing is saying, listen, I want you to sell me an investment where once I hit retirement age, I will be able to withdraw X dollars every year for the rest of my life. And so the only thing you have to decide is how much do you have to pay for this thing? And so a lot of investors, when they're saving for their retirement, will buy an annuity through an insurance company. And so every month they'll make a payment to the insurance company, which guarantees that when they hit retirement age, they can count on getting so many dollars a year from their annuity. Okay, so the word annuity you do see in many contexts in finance. So anyway, suppose in our case, let's look at an example. Oh, before we do that, I want to show you the formula we're about to use. So you remember our formula that we've been using the last couple of classes. This is the formula that we use to calculate the future value of a sum of money. And that P, of course, is the sum of money. It's called the principal. And you know what the rest of these terms mean. For example, A is the future value. P is the principal, which is simply the amount that's either borrowed or lent. R is the annual rate of interest, and it's a percentage. N is the compounding frequency. And then finally, T is the time measured in years. All right, this one we're very familiar with. In fact, we're actually getting pretty comfortable with it, aren't we? It's no longer seen as a very scary formula, whereas 2 weeks ago, it was seen as a very scary formula. So we have to extend it a little bit now to calculate the future value of an annuity. And the reason why it's more complicated is because instead of having a single investment or a single amount that's being borrowed, we have a repeated series of payments that are either being borrowed or lent. And so the formula, of course, will be more complicated. So why don't we take a look at this new formula and see how it stacks up with this one. All right, are we ready? Okay, there we go. So the one on the left is the new formula. This is the formula we'll use from now on when we're dealing with annuities. Whether they're annual annuities, whether they're monthly, it doesn't seem to matter. They all work very well. Now, what I would like to point out here, though, is that not only is this new formula a little bit more complicated, but we've replaced the principal P with this new term R, which stands for repeated payment. So you notice there's no P in this new formula. The P was meant to represent a single amount of money that is either borrowed or lent. This R is different because it is being repeated multiple times. The rest of these terms you already know. Now, with the other class, I spent a lot of time showing them strategies for implementing this on their calculators because it is a bit involved. And we're going to do the same thing here. The first step will always be to plug in the numbers that you are given. The second step is to simplify as much as possible. And then the third step is to, well, implement it on your calculator. So, well, you'll see by the time we're done that this is a little bit more messy, but we can certainly handle it. After all that practice we had with the lump sum formula over here on the right. Well, now why don't we look at an example? Okay, so here's a case where the winner of a lottery will receive $5,000 semi-annually, which means twice a year, by the way, for 5 years, starting next year, or actually not next year, next month, in 6 months. I shouldn't say that, but the funds will be invested in a bank account that pays an annual percentage rate of 6%, but the interest is compounded semi-annually. How much will the lottery winner have in 5 years? Well, what do we know? If you look on the top, since there are 10 payments of $5,000, sorry, hold on. 10 payments of $5,000. This new variable R is $5,000. That's the number that's being repeated every 6 months. T is 5 years. The rate of interest R is 6%. And N, that's the compounding frequency, where, by the way, in a case like this, the payments and the interest are being paid out twice a year. They have to be consistent with each other. If we have semi-annual payments, we're going to be looking at a semi-annually compounded rate of interest. So everything here is taking place twice a year. So in the bottom, I've drawn this diagram. This is called a timeline. It's meant to show us how the cash flows look as time goes by. So in other words, you can see, because these are semi-annual payments, we'll get a payment in 6 months of $5,000. And then in a year, we'll get another one. And then in 18 months, another one. In 2 years, another. And this goes all the way out to 10 years. So again, it's $5,000 every 6 months. Oh, sorry, my fault. This is labeled badly. It's not 10 years. I'm sorry. It's 5 years. Let me fix this. 5 years, 10 payments, but 5 years. That's better. Okay. So in other words, for 5 years, twice a year, we get a $5,000 check, which adds up to 10 payments spread out over 5 years. Well, the question now is, if I put all this money in the bank, as soon as I get my hands on it, how much money will I have in my account at the end of 5 years? Now, one thing we could do is to take our old favorite formula, this one, and apply it to all 10 of these cash flows. That would work, okay? Each one of these individually could be determined, the future value, by using this formula that we know and love. But how long would that take? Well, it would take a long time. So do you think it's a good idea to keep using that formula for each of these individual cash flows? I don't think so. So let's try this new formula and see how it works. All right, are we ready? So what information do we have? Well, we know T is 5 years, capital R is $5,000, lowercase r is 6% expressed as 0.06, N is 2. And so we're going to plug in some numbers and see what we come up with. Now, before we do this though, just keep in mind that altogether, the lottery will be paying this person $50,000. Okay, $5,000 twice a year for 5 years adds up to $50,000. That means whatever number we get when we calculate the future value, it has to be at least $50,000. So don't forget about that. That'll help you avoid mistakes. If you get less than 50,000, then something is wrong. All right, let's check it out. So let's plug in some numbers. And yes, it's a bit of a mess. Over here on the right, I've plugged in all the numbers, and directly below it, I've actually simplified it. In the bottom left-hand corner, you can see the actual answer. But what I'm going to do is show you on the next slide how to implement this on your calculators, because it isn't maybe as obvious as it could be how to go about this. All right, so and when we're ready, when we're caught up, I'll show you what keystrokes could be used to implement this on your calculator. So, but you do notice here that the 5,000 stays. 0.06 over 2 is, of course, 3%. That's added to 1 here to give me 1.03. The exponent is 10. I subtract 1 from that, and then finally in the denominator, 0.06 over 2 has been reduced to 3%. So this formula right here on the bottom isn't that bad. The one directly above it, that one is a nightmare. The one down here, not so bad. We can handle this one as long as we do it carefully. All right, so let's go ahead and see what the keystrokes are. And I hope you have your calculator right in front of you. Well, of course you do. As long as your cell phone is near your hands, you have your calculator. If you have a regular calculator, that's fine too. It might, the keystrokes should work exactly the same way no matter what calculator you're using. So let's see how we might do this. What I would recommend you do is this. What I've done is I've actually started with the number that's in the brackets. The information in the brackets is right here. Okay, it may not be that obvious, but this section is what we're seeing inside the brackets. I don't know why I put a quote there. I don't need a quote. Just that section I've just highlighted here. Whoops, actually, let me change that color a little. That represents what's going on inside the brackets. How do I take 1.03, raise it to the 10th power, and subtract 1? So you put 1.03, exponential key 10, equals -1 equals. And when you're done, you should have something like 0.3439 with a bunch of more digits in the window. That's the first step. The second thing you should do is now multiply by the 5,000 over here. And so what you'll end up with is the entire top line here represents the numerator of your expression. So after you multiply the 3439 by 5,000, you'll have a number, depending on how you round it, that's right around $1,719.58. And then the last thing you have to worry about is dividing by that 0.03 in the denominator. So after the equal here, it should show 1719.58 in your window. Then you hit divided by 0.03 equals, and that's approximately what you'll see in the window, give or take a little bit of rounding. So what we're going to do is make sure that everybody is getting this before we go on to the next example. All right, does everyone, let me know if you're not getting it. Here we go. All right. Okay. Now you see, this is a very complicated formula, and yet by being careful with it, we've been able to implement it with no problems. But yes, I agree that this is a lot of steps, but as long as we're careful, like you notice what I've done, again, I've decided to calculate what's inside the brackets first. We could have gone from left to right, but that would have involved a lot of parentheses, and that just makes things a lot more complicated. I personally think you should always start with the most complicated expression first and work your way back to the simpler expressions. By doing it this way, we end up with 57,319.40. That's the future value. So in other words, because the investor put this money in the bank every time he received a check, even though the checks only added up to $50,000, the investment itself is worth at the end 57,319.40. All right. Okay, so everyone's got it? No problems? Okay. All right, I'll give you a second to catch up, and then we'll go on to the next one. Okay. Are we ready? Now we're going to go back to the original example that we started out our discussion with. The lottery winner is scheduled to receive a prize of $100,000 a year for 10 years, with the first payment starting next year. The payments are made annually, so this is a true annuity. The interest rate that they can earn in the bank is 6% per year, compounded annually as a result. If the winner invests, let me just make that very clear here. Again, we're assuming that the investor or the winner of this lottery invests all the money. How much will they end up with after all the payments have been made? All right, so what do we know in this case? It's a 10-year lottery. The payments, the repeated payments are 100,000 per year. The rate of interest is 6%. In fact, let me start writing this stuff up here. It's 100,000. The number of years is 10. The payments are made annually, and the interest is compounded annually as well. And R is 6%. Well, how much will they have? All right, here we go. So we get to use this brand new formula. First, let's plug, we'll do the first two steps here. We'll plug everything in, and then we'll simplify. On the next slide, we'll see how to implement the keystrokes. All right, so we'll take a minute. And now here, the simplification part is very simple, in fact, because these are annual payments. Doesn't always work out so nicely, though. Okay. All right, so let's move to the next slide where we remind ourselves how to actually implement this. Okay, so what I did here is I broke it up a little differently. What I've got here, the top row represents the brackets. Okay, all of this is just what's in the brackets. You notice on the second row, I'm then multiplying it by 100,000 because that's what we have here. And the denominator, the third case is where I'm dividing by the denominator. On the right, I'm showing you what should appear in your window after those keystrokes. All right, so make sure you're getting the same thing I'm getting. Okay, so you can see we received $1 million worth of payments from the lottery, but by investing them, we pushed that total up to 1,318,079.49. Now, okay, so is everyone caught up? Let's do this now. Remember before when we started this section, we wondered if it would be better to have an annuity of $100,000 a year for 10 years or get the $1 million right away. So just for the fun of it, let's just say we want to know what would have happened if we had received the $1 million right away and invested it for 10 years. Okay, what would be the future value of this investment? So for this formula, because it's only a single lump sum payment, we're going to go back and rely on our old friend from way back up here. Hold on, let me go grab it. Here we go. Okay, so this is a lump sum payment. We're going to use this formula. All right, just for the fun of it. And remember, in this case, there's only one investment. That will be our P, $1 million. T is 10 years. And this is, oh, by the way, we're assuming the same interest rate. Boy. Okay, I have to fix this. There we go. So in other words, we have to make sure that we assume that it's the same interest rate. Otherwise, we're comparing apples with oranges. All right, so why don't we do this? Why don't you plug those numbers in? Because you have so much practice with this formula, why don't you go ahead and tell me what you get when you use this formula? All right, anyone have a number? Remember, with the annuity, it was roughly $1.3 million. What are we getting here? All right, let's find out. First of all, let's make the substitutions. 1 million is multiplied by, in parentheses, 1 plus the ratio of 0.06 to, oh, somebody's got it. It's one, oh, that's a little low. Try it again. 1.06 over 1 to the, now n in this case is 1, but t is 10. Oh my God, how big that is. Okay, so when we simplify this, oh my God, no, that's too much. Oh, much better. Okay, so we end up with 1,000,000 times 1.06 to the 10th power. So in your calculator, what you can do is 1,000,000 times 1.06 exponent 10. I think that'll work. Let me just confirm this real fast. Hold on one second. Because I keep saying, you know, every calculator is slightly different. So I'm going to, oh, here we go. All right, well, don't worry, we'll check it out. We'll get it right now. I'm just want to make sure that what I'm doing here is actually working correctly. That's it. All right, this should do it. If you follow these keystrokes, you'll get 1,790,847.70. Let's say I'm rounding it to 0.70. Oh, you know what I forgot? Oh, sorry. You know what I just noticed? I left out the 10. Okay, that should do it. Try that. Go across from left to right, 1,000,000. Don't type the commas, by the way. 1,000,000 times 1.06 exponent 10 equals. Yeah, that'll do it. All right. Now, what was it before? This is when the when receiving $1 million right away. And what did we get when we had an annuity? Okay, so does everyone have it now? Beautiful. All right, so if you didn't get it, give it a couple more, just give it another shot. Make sure you follow the keystrokes exactly, and I mean exactly. And make sure you're getting what I'm getting. So you can see it made kind of a big difference. Now, the reason why the difference is so large is because it was $1 million. If it was a smaller amount, the difference wouldn't be so noticeable. Oh, you finally got, all right, perfect. Yes, exactly. All right, now you've got it straight. It'll always be easy from now on. Just follow these exact same keystrokes and you'll always get the right answer. So yes, it did end up making a big difference. All right. So yes, the person who got the full lump sum payment right away would have gotten more interest than the person who received the annuity. Okay, so, all right, great. So those are done. Now let's try another example. I'm with the annuity formula, I mean. I'm sure we could use a little practice. And also we could use some practice seeing different situations as well, because they're not always identical to each other. All right, let's try this one. What if we had somebody who's saving their money? And instead of once, now in the last section, we saw several examples where somebody put money in the bank once, and we wanted to know how much they have in the future. This is different what we're about to do because they're putting the same amount away more than once. So for example, let's look at this case. An investor decides to put $1,000 every quarter into a bank account that pays 4% interest compounded quarterly for the next 20 years. So it's not $1,000 for 20 years. It's $1,000 4 times a year for 20 years. And that makes a big difference. So this is no longer the future value of the sum. This is now the future value of what we will call a quarterly annuity, meaning the same exact payment every quarter. Now, as far as our variables go, capital R, the repeated payment is $1,000. The interest is 4% per year, R, lowercase r. The compounding frequency is 4 times a year. And the number of years is 20. So we're actually putting quite a bit of money into this bank account. In fact, we're actually putting $4,000 every year for 20 years. So the total investment is $80,000. So our future value will clearly be more than $80,000. Now on the bottom, what I've done is I've made the substitutions for you. On the next slide, we'll do the simplifications, and then we'll look at this keystrokes. All right, so let's do this part first, and then we'll do the simplifications. Actually, I copied this into the next slide anyway, so why don't we jump ahead? I just noticed it now. So this is after the substitutions are made. Down here, the important one is where we've made all the simplifications. All right, that's what we're going to use as our starting point. Okay, now, keystroke wise, the first row is the brackets. We do that first so that all that remains is to multiply that result by 1,000 and then divide that result by 0.01. So by doing it this way, you can see step by step what you're supposed to get every step along the way. So the brackets, as you can see here, should give you 1 point. Whoops, no, they don't. Wait, what did I do here? Hold on a second. I just want to double check this in case I made a mistake. 1.01 raised to the 80th power. Oh, this might be right. Equals, nope, that's it, 1.216. Okay, false alarm. Everything's fine. So after you subtracted 1 from this result, you'll get 1.2167152. Then down here, you can see we're multiplying by 1,000 so that when we're done, we have the numerator in the second row. And then all we have to do is divide by 0.01. And finally, we end up with 121,671.52. All right, so make sure that you're getting those numbers. All right, are we all set? Good. Okay, so there you go. Now we're going to twist this around a little and do something really interesting. Suppose I do decide to buy a car. I know what the retail price is. What I don't know is what the monthly payments will be. And really, when you come right down to it, that's what will determine if I can afford it or not the sticker price. I mean, it's hard to say when you look at cars how much they're going to actually cost you. But suppose it turns out that you have budgeted $500 a month for your car payments. And then you look at a car that you like and they tell you, and by the way, the dealer will do this for you. They'll tell you what the monthly payments would be if you buy that car. But if you want to bring your calculator along and do it yourself, that's fine too. If they tell you that, let's say the monthly payments would be $450, then you're happy because that means you can afford it. But how do we do that? How do we solve for the payment in one of these formulas? Well, let's see. For example, an investor wants to have $100,000 in the bank in 3 years. If he can earn 3% per year compounded annually, how much must he save each year to reach that goal? Well, guess what? That amount he's saving will be the same every year, which means that what we're looking at here is the payment in an annuity. So first things first, if you take the original formula, this one, and rearrange it algebraically, you can solve for R. Okay, in fact, I'm going to do it for you right here. Look at this. If you rearrange, you don't have to because it's already done. The formula that we started out with is on the left. The one on the right is after you've rearranged it to solve for R. That's how we figure out the payment. Now, in our case, it's an annual payment. And so what do we know? Well, we're told that the future value that we're aiming for is $100,000. The annual rate is 3% compounded annually, and it's a 3-year investment. So why don't we do this? Let's do some plugging in. All right, so this is the new formula, the R formula. I've plugged in all the numbers here that we have been given. And now the surprise is already spoiled for you. The answer is already there. But what I've provided here is first, the simplification is up here. I simplified it and I actually did it in 2 steps. All of this reduces, as it turns out, to 3,000 divided by 1.03 cubed minus 1. Now, unfortunately, this one requires, let's just say, a sequence of keystrokes that you might not have expected. What do I mean by that? If you look carefully at what I've done here, you'll see that for the first time ever, we're using double parentheses. Now, when we use 2 parentheses like this, you have to be extra, extra careful to make sure that for every left parenthesis, there is a corresponding right parenthesis. So here, there's 2 in a row here on the left, and then the 2 right parentheses are not together, but there are 2 right parentheses. That's good. If you have the wrong number of parentheses, you will absolutely get the wrong answer. So what I'd like you to do is try this on your calculator. Just take the, just follow these keystrokes and make sure you're getting the correct answer, which happens to be 32,353.04. All right, so just go through that step by step. And make sure you're getting the same thing. Oops. All right, so let's look at a new example, okay? Suppose that Bill Jones wants to buy a $40,000 car and can borrow this amount from a bank. The bank will require monthly payments over a period of 6 years, and they charge 6% compounded monthly. What will be the size of Bill's monthly payments? So we're using the same formula again. Where is it? Hold on. Where we know that A is 40,000. We know that R is 6%, and is 12 because it's monthly payments, and T is 6. All right, so the next slide, we're going to plug in all those numbers, and then on the slide after that, we're going to see what keystrokes are needed to solve for these monthly payments. All right, so let's jump ahead here. So you can see all the plugging in has been done. All right, make sure you're plugging everything in correctly. And then, and the next slide, we'll do the simplification, and then we'll do the keystrokes. All right, so, all right, let me give you a minute to catch up. Okay, so in the next slide, you'll see I've repeated this, substitution formula. Directly below it will be the simplifications, and then on the bottom, you'll see the keystrokes, which I would like you to attempt and make sure you're getting the same number. Okay, so here we go. Take a look. You can see this is where we just plugged in the numbers. That is reducing to this one on the left, which I then simplified a little bit further. And once we get to that point, we can apply our, I guess we could call it our double parenthesis formula. And you can see at the end, the monthly payments are about $462.92 after a little bit of rounding. All right, so make sure you're getting that number. All right. Did we all get 462.92? All right. So what we're going to do next on Thursday, is we're going to get some more practice with these concepts we just introduced today. And then we'll introduce something new, which is a little bit, well, more straightforward to calculate, but also very important, which is called, it involves a discussion about two different ways that interest rates can be expressed in the market. But we'll have to save that until we've gotten enough practice with these ideas. We want to make sure we all are on the same page. We can all handle these formulas. Then we can dive into something new. And of course, we'll have a few more fun videos, of course. And so right now, I think all you have to do between now and Thursday is make sure you understand what we've been doing. That's it. Okay. So if you're ready, if you've finished this, why don't we stop right here, and I'll see you all on Thursday.
Thank
Right.
you. Have a good day.
Okay, you're welcome. All right, see you later. Okay, bye.